Today marks 2 years since George Floyd's death, and in the months following that tragic killing, America's big banks stepped up. They pledged to step in and fill the racial wealth gap and make banking more accessible to Black Americans. J.P. Morgan and Jamie Dimon pledging $30 billion to advance racial equity. Citi and Bank of America also committed to more than $1 billion. Harold Butler is the Citi Diverse Financial Institutions Group Head, and he joins us now. Harold, nice to see you. Former President Barack Obama just tweeting about this important day in our country. He says in the aftermath of his murder, a new generation of activists rose up to channel their anguish into organized action, launching a movement to raise awareness of systemic racism and the need for criminal justice and police reform. But there was also this movement made to fill this racial wealth gap. How much progress has been made?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And, I think a tremendous amount of progress has been made. Certainly here at Citi, the commitment that you mentioned, we've done quite a bit to execute on that commitment from actually impacting communities, underrepresented communities of color through education, through housing, through business loans, supporting entrepreneurs, and principally, you mentioned the Diverse Financial Institutions Group that I have the pleasure of leading. It's really been through diverse financials, right? How do the banks themselves impact those very communities of color that many of the uprisings that President Obama mentioned, the communities that uprose and marched and sought for equality? A lot of these minority banks work and service those communities. We've been doing a great deal in that area to support growth and inclusion.
And Harold, you mentioned some of those initiatives that Citi itself has been taking just in terms of providing greater access to banking and credit in communities of color. You also talked about access to home ownership among Black Americans, yes, advancing anti-racist practices in financial services industry. How do we make sure that we continue on this path of progress, that we don't fall in 3 to 5 years back to where we were before?
That would be a travesty, wouldn't it? And I think part of what's important here, right, is really in the action, right? It's important and I think this will lend itself to making sure we don't end up where we began, where organizations, banks, businesses, et cetera, actually deliver on those commitments that they talk about. So it's not just day one, it's a great idea, and then day two, or day 3 or day 4, then there's an action around it. And I think that's really what's important. And the second important leg in that stool is the fact that we talk about it, right? The fact that you all are having me on here today to talk about the relative importance of this is monumental, because unless we put it in the ethos, as I like to say, and have conversations about it, things don't change.
COVID, as you know, disproportionately impacted Black business owners across the country. Are we seeing that improve, Harold?
We are. Well, let's put it this way. There's plenty of work to be done. But I think the fact that Black business owners, entrepreneurs, are getting access to and understanding how to get access to capital, which is paramount to growth. And I oftentimes talk about the relative importance of financial services in underrepresented communities of color across this country, right? We sometimes, and you've heard it, you may have had a show on it when we talk about food deserts and how those food deserts impact underrepresented communities. Well, at the very essence of the food desert is the lack of financial services. Without financial services, which include affordable housing, it includes education, it includes, capital to build community centers to help communities feel safe. It includes investment in those communities so that we can get rid of food deserts. And so I think we're trekking in the right direction. We need everybody to get in the game, as we like to say, and it's going to take all of us to continue to support this endeavor.
Well, Harold, speaking of that, getting everyone in the game, to put it in your words, what else would you like to hear from fellow corporate leaders or from policymakers, from politicians in particular, in order to advance this movement?
Well, I think certainly when it comes to corporates, right? Let's start with corporates. I think being creative is going to have to be part of the solution, right? We can't talk about what we used to do. We have to talk about what we can do. And part of being able to do that is being able to collaborate and talk about and communicate with the banks themselves and the communities to come up with solutions that meet the needs of those communities. Not solutions that we think are great for the community, but yet solutions in partnership with banks and broker-dealers of a diverse nature that actually serve those communities. And I think on the regulatory front, I think the banks themselves, for example, are doing a great job of advocating what's important by way of regulation. And I think regulators, members of Congress are doing a great job of hearing and listening. And I think they're doing also a great job of making sure that banks themselves are accountable.
And Harold, real quick, before we
Just
let
need
you
to do more.
Yeah, and speaking of doing more, you are someone who is certainly an example, a role model for so many people out there on Wall Street or in whatever industry that they are in right now. I'm curious just to get your thoughts just on your success as a black male executive and what you think can be done in order to enhance the pipeline for people of color and getting more people into a position like yours.
You know, I thank you for asking the question. I think it's a great question. And, you know, it is, I think, important to note that I don't have a Wall Street legacy, right? And meaning I didn't grow up on Wall Street. I joined this bank 17 years ago from, you know, a technology company. And I think part of where we're focused today, and I know we're really focused on this today at Citi, is making sure that we create a culture of inclusiveness and make sure that we communicate that all diverse ideas and thoughts are welcome here at Citi. We can very easily train people to be great bankers, right? They come from diverse backgrounds, maybe lawyers or maybe, you know, doctors. But what we need to do is to you know, make this a culture that's embracing, that brings them in, and be able to communicate that in such a way that folks will want to be a part of Citi. And the industry, we got a great industry in the financial services, right? But there's folks always think there's a price you have to pay to play. And I like to debunk that rumor. I think that's really not the right message to send. This is an environment and a culture where everybody are welcome. And I think there's lots of room to be creative and to do the things that are necessary.
Very important message to get out there. Harold Butler, great to have you, Citi's Diverse Financial Institutions Group Head. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.